Dan, it is fantastic to see you. I am super excited to connect as always. And, today I wanted to start with something I had read on LinkedIn the other day. I think you had attended an event, and the person who ran the event, they did sort of a post recapping the event. And there was something, I'm going to paraphrase it here, so you can
I'm
correct
getting
me.
nervous here.
uh, where it was really something where you were talking about how the CFO really needs to help drive, be a key part of driving firm strategy. And if you're not doing that, the words that this person used was glorified bookkeeper. I don't know if you use those words or not, but the thing that I wanted to cover today, because you're in such a great position to talk about it in your current role at Lerer Hippeau, as well as from all your time over at Marker, is I really want to dig into some specific examples of how CFOs help drive firm strategy across a couple different areas. So that's the main topic. But before we hit record, we were talking about, my kids are going to be going to college soon. We talked about, certainly you have the accounting and finance background, but you double majored in journalism. And I've never seen that before. I've seen investors with the journalism, but never a CFO. So I'd love to hear just like, how did that come about? That's super interesting.
It is just a wacky way. You never know how life goes, but believe it or not, I graduated high school at 18 years old, 17, 18 years old, and wanted to be a sports broadcaster. And that's what I wanted to do. And I wanted to work in radio or TV and be the next Marv Albert or the next, I guess, Mike Frances on WFAN, and had pursued a career, had pursued a journalism, degree. And then in the process of that, and I was kind of talking about your daughter, that, I was able to double degree. Some universities are kind of open to you having multiple majors and multiple degrees, and University of Maryland was open to it. So I kind of got a second degree in accounting. In the saying, hey, if it doesn't work out, if there's a very good chance I'm not going to be broadcasting the NBA finals when I'm older, and I could always do this stuff. And quite frankly, I actually worked a little bit in radio and TV after graduation. Got my first job at Arthur Anderson. I'm dating and aging myself with the Anderson reference, but got the job at Anderson and worked in accounting ever since. And kind of the financial roles. That being said, I have to be totally honest. Like, I use my journalism degree every day. Like, what I'm doing with you right now is communicating. I'm writing emails. And I know today Claude and ChatGPT write a lot of people's emails, but believe it or not, for the last 25 years of my career, I was actually writing the emails myself. And I do think the communication skills, both written and oral, are super, super important, especially for the CFOs, because we're the storytellers of the firm. We're storytellers internally. We're storytellers often externally. And I just think it's a CFO that has, I don't think we were going to talk about this on the agenda, but maybe we will, but a CFO that has communication skills is absolute table stakes.
I love that. I've never heard it framed that way. So, again, let's pull on the thread from the journalism background. What are some, I guess, communications best practices maybe that you use every day at the firm that maybe would come from a journalism background that you have, but maybe a CFO or an aspiring CFO maybe wouldn't have?
I mean, I always give this. This is the last 24 hours, and honestly, the last 12 hours in the day in the life of a CFO. One is we're actually working on a somewhat complex follow-on round in one of our portfolio companies where there's a big investor that doesn't want to participate. They're kind of out of the business, and we want them to participate. So we're kind of putting some structure around having preferreds. And there's just a very complicated back and forth between our lawyers, the company's lawyers, the CEO, my boss Lerer Hippeau, and Eric literally just sent me an email last night at 8 o'clock last night saying, can you summarize this for me? Because Eric has 100 emails in his inbox back and forth, and it's our job. Oftentimes, as we're the folks that are in the weeds and the details, that I need to basically take, all this back and forth communication and consolidate it into like an article, like a news article. Like, hey, like a 3 paragraph, maybe 9 or 10 lines, probably 200 words at max. And that is not indifferent than someone who covered a press conference or covered a game or or a situation, and then had to go back and report I say this, I learned this in my sophomore year in University of Maryland, is like a lead is the first sentence you use in an article, and you kind of have to like start with your lead and start kind of most important first, and that's exactly what I did last night on that with Eric. But I'm communicating all day in my seat. Hopefully good stuff. Sometimes there's bad, but hopefully good stuff.
And do you ever so the body of the content, right? That that short summary that you have to put together across all these sources, given the sort of high stakes nature, right? That's not something you're gonna jam in a chat GPT and just spit it out, right? Like it really, yeah.
I will tell you. So Eric came by my desk yesterday morning, and he's like, "Hey, can we get a review on this?" And just I've been uploading legal documents into Gemini, and saying, "Hey, for the last, I'd say 2 months, I've been doing a dual process Gemini and legal review." A little bit for fun, also a little bit for like, hey, how good is this? And so I said to Eric, hey, we'll send it to our attorneys, but I'm also going to put it to Gemini, and Gemini didn't get it. It's a complicated thing. We're like, hey, we're gonna do a new round. We need the preferred consent, but this one you needed. Every share class also had a carve out in another document. It's a very complicated thing. Gemini didn't get it right, to be honest, and our lawyer had a different take. Both our lawyer and the company's counsel had a different take to Gemini. It's interesting to use and do, but I think we're still at that process where like I have to run a dual process, and in that case, and sometimes it does help that ChatGPT and we use Claude here internally, do help in writing certain stuff and editing. But I think we're at that point still where there's still a human involved. We're using AI, but there's still very much human involvement.
Got it. Yeah, as I talk to CFOs of at different firms, they're all starting to use this stuff in different ways. So I'm glad you. I was going to ask you that at the end, so I'm glad you jumped in with that now. Shifting gears a little bit, how how is fund growth strategy sort of handled or worked on by the CFO at a fund? So I think the last fund you just closed was 230. Is that right?
Uh, 230 was our combined funds from one generation ago. We just raised a fund nine at 190, about $200 million, our last fund, which was substantially larger than our last core fund was $140 million. So this is like a 30% increase from our fund cycle, earlier fund cycle.
What so when you're analyzing like, hey, what is the target for the new fund, right? And I imagine that depending on that target, like it's gonna make your life different in terms of planning it, like making that decision and then actually going and doing it. So from a strategic perspective as CFO, when you're thinking about, hey, bumping the fund size, what kind of questions are you asking internally at the firm to like make sure that everyone
Yeah.
is on the
No,
same
it's
page?
it's a great question. We had a very in-depth fund model when we went out to market and talked about exactly what we're trying to do, and really had it pretty much accounted for every dollar. A couple of things was just slightly larger check sizes. One of the things in reality is that seed rounds have gotten larger than they were. A seed round today is 4.5, 5, 6, sometimes could be even $8 million when it was 2 or 3 or $4 million not that long ago. Um, our check size, we had originally targeted 10% ownership. Now we're targeting a little bit more, 11 or 12% ownership. And part of that is one of the things also is there's also inflation. Like, a $30 million round today, $30 million today is different than it was 5 years ago or even 10 years ago. It's not an immaterial difference. It's actually somewhat larger. So like there's actually like an inflation in prices. Our strategy is not going to be any different. We're still deploying pretty much the same amount of checks, same maybe a slightly higher targeted ownership, and our check sizes just have kind of gone up a little bit in higher ownership, but also just the round size is becoming larger. Due to seed just becoming a bigger space.
Got it. From an infrastructure perspective and how that powers the firm, how do you think about that? And more importantly, I know from previous conversations, all sort of the data stuff, any AI related stuff, that all kind of flows through you. So, how do you drive that conversation in the firm again when you're in the partner meeting on Monday morning?
Yeah, and I'm a data guy. Well, I think it's a good marriage for me. And first of all, we have 500 companies that we pretty much invested in, so we have like 15 years worth of data, which is fantastic. And we've got the good, the bad, and the ugly, and everything in between. In addition to that, we also have always historically gotten a lot of our KPI. We have information rights. Pretty much every deal in the last like 7 or 8 years, we have information rights on every seed deal we have. So we collect all the information on a quarterly basis for the major KPIs. for, historically, really for the last 7 or 8 years. So we have fantastic data, not just actually at the transaction level, but also at the underlying level. And we're really able to utilize and synthesize that data into making decisions and what companies need today to raise an A, what companies needed, 5 years ago to raise an A. What does Series A look like today in terms of revenue metrics than it did 5 years ago? What's performance like? What is, when we say we want to target a check size of 12%, well, what will that look like 3 or 4 years down the line when the companies raise financing and will get diluted most likely in subsequent rounds, and what that will look like and what exits will kind of look like, and start doing some scenario modeling in terms of what we need to get, what we need to have. So as far as that check size. So there's a ton of data that we've collected over the years. We'll use and model out, and to kind of get to a right size, both fund size and check size that fits into that.
What are there any examples of times where maybe there was a sort of belief, generally within the firm that things are this way, but then when you do a deep dive on the data, actually see maybe a kind of a different answer or a different perspective? And any examples that you could share, or an example you could share about something like that? Again, just thinking about how does the CFO really drive that
I
discussion?
I think we've gotten a lot smarter on follow-on investing. And certainly, like, we call it the bridge to nowheres, where, like, a company is struggling and, they may need, and I think, we historically, we still are very, very founder friendly. We love all of our companies, but I think we've gotten smarter using a lot of the data and historical information that we've had over the years. Again, 500 deals and 15 years of data of, like, some of the follow-on checks that we've written have not been the best checks, or some of it's we're just going to overpriced rounds where, a great firm is leading a Series B. We saw this circa 21, 22. Great firm is leading $100 million, $100 million round size Series B, $400 million pre-money valuation, 500 post. Let's do our pro rata. And it's like, the company had $8 million in revenue, and, like, yeah, it's doing well, but it's not worth $500 million. Um, or the bridge to nowheres. And we've able to kind of use a lot of that data, where today in our fund 9, and I think, and we're, by the way, we're investing at a fund 8 still on our follow-ons. We're still investing follow-on at a fund 8 and some at a fund 7, that our thesis and investment decisions are very different than I think in the earlier funds as it relates to follow-on investing, and a much higher bar, and a much, kind of much more stringent underwriting, as it relates to follow-on investing. Because
And are there any specific parameters or filters that you call out that are like kind of new now, right? Based on there's a sort of a change in process or the way you look at those follow-ons. Is there anything specific you'd call out? Say we used to do it this way, and now we do it
Yeah,
this
well,
way.
one is that we force rank. We sometimes, I think we did look at checks maybe sometimes in a vacuum, where, hey, we like the company, they're doing great, they're doing everything they're supposed to be doing. Let's invest. And I've always made the point that, an investment dollar in a closed end fund is not just a decision on the company that you're investing in today, but it's also your other companies that you have in a portfolio, and the opportunity cost that if I put $1 into this company today, I'm not going to be able to put $1 into a company B and C, because I've already invested that dollar. So what we do today is we force rank our portfolio. We kind of go, and the team kind of votes on this. We go, we have as many as 50 companies in the portfolio. It goes 1 through 50. Everyone kind of puts their vote in, and it's not even just quartiling, but we actually just pure ranking 1 through 1, kind of 1 through whatever the last company is. And when a discussion comes down to making a follow-on investment and how much we want to put in, it always takes into consideration what are some of the other companies we have in the portfolio, and does this dollar, maximize our returns vis-a-vis, where else we could deploy into this company. And oftentimes companies are doing great, they're raising great rounds, and sometimes the price just isn't, like, say, hey, we're not going to participate in this round or not do our full pro rata because the price might be too rich, and we may be able to get a better return elsewhere. And we've certainly had those instances.
Yeah, and I can see there being needing to strike a balance there, right? Because again, your firm is and been around for a long time and very well regarded by founders. At the same time, those pro rata decisions, right? Like obviously that affects a variety of elements to every company in the portfolio.
And
So
founders have understood. I think they're good problems to have. Oftentimes, where you have an oversubscribed round, or it's oftentimes a good problem to have. Um, What we like to do is we want to put our most dollars in our best companies. I know it sounds like that's a very easy strategy, but when you're in the thick of things over the course of a 2 to 5 year investment, that you're, initial period of 2 years, then years 3, 4, and 5 or 6, kind of doing follow-on investing, sometimes that gets lost in the week, kind of gets lost. And we really want to be organized and kind of very consistent approach that we want to put our most amount of capital into our very, very best companies.
Makes sense. One more question for you, and it's been interesting as I talk to now so many fund CFOs and learn about how they do things, how their firms are structured. You just see different sort of sizes and shapes and configurations. And so, one thing when I talk to Dave Rivenis over at O1 Advisors, so Dave he's COO, CFO, and he handles investor relations. And I don't know the number of people at the firm versus at Lerer, but I think y'all are like a little bigger in terms of people wise, and have certainly been around a lot longer. Um, I, as you know, am friends with Joe at the firm, right? Who's the partner who leads IR. So, what's the CFO IR interface like? How does that look? How does that work?
Believe it or not, and this is probably not my skill set strong, but I was actually did a lot of the investor relations before Joe, and it was really just like kind of throwing, you know, I had some, some capacity, I'd helped Eric out in investor relations, and I don't think I think I can tell the story, and I think I can, I did a decent enough job, but Joe is fantastic at investor relations. So really for funds, I joined in July of 2019. We raised Fund 7, in December of 2019, and then I did full Fund 8. We used a placement agent for Fund 7, and then when we did Fund 8 in 2022, we did not, and I pretty much ran the process there, with help from some other folks in the team, and had always been super involved with investor relations. Again, I'll go back to the storytelling part aspect of any CFO's job, and I think, I think having the ability to tell that story is super important for any CFO, whether it be investors or internally. I think the CFO should know the portfolio better than pretty much anyone on the team. And so when you get a question from an LP of like, hey, what's going on with this company? What's going on with these returns? I do think it kind of comes down to the CFO. One of the things with investor relations is that it's a little bit time consuming, as you might know, and you have a lot of meetings and discussions sessions. And Joe does a fantastic job at that. I'm a numbers guy. I'm an accounting major and numbers guy, and a CFO, and Joe is probably has a little better skill set than I do as far as meeting with investors and or it's kind of setting up meetings and just telling that kind of investor relation side of things. And he's done a fantastic job for us in IR. So.
Awesome. Dan, always appreciate the time. Really enjoyed this and loved hearing about how the CFO at a fund can really help drive the strategy. So thanks again.
Thanks to you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.